Hopkins Medicine and a recent diversity newsletter that came out this January detailing what privilege is, who has it, and what you can do about it. Now, this diversity newsletter was put out by the Chief Diversity Officer at Johns Hopkins Medicine. Her name is Sharita Hills Golden. She is an MD alongside being the Chief Diversity Officer, and she took it upon herself this January to tell all those at Johns Hopkins Medicine what exact privilege they hold and what they can do about it. Of course, it's created a lot of backlash, and we're going to get to that. Before that, let's take a look at the newsletter itself, what she says about privilege, and the list of people that she puts down that have it. Okay, so the list says that privilege is a set of unearned benefits given to people who are in a specific social group. Privilege operates on a personal, interpersonal, cultural, and institutional level, and it provides advantages and favors to members of dominant groups at the expense of members of other groups. In the United States, privilege is granted to people who have membership in one or more of these social identity groups. And you guys know how I feel about privilege. We've talked about it on this show many a time before. You cannot look at a specific group of people that share one characteristic and label them with a privilege that they now get to utilize and exercise over others.
Facts.
It's just simply not the case.
Facts.
Now, more often than not, you hear the phrase white privilege. That's the one that's typically thrown around. But luckily, Sharita Hill decided to expand on the list far beyond being white. Let's take a look and see if you fall into one of these many groups. Beyond white people, we have able-bodied people.
I
guess
check
hit
that.
one. Heterosexual people.
I check
hit
that.
that one. Cisgender
I
people.
check
Also
that.
in that group. Males.
I
not
check
in that
that.
group, but I'm sure many of you are. Christian.
I don't.
Middle or owning class people.
I don't.
Middle-aged people.
I don't.
And English-speaking people.
I
If
do.
you're a member of any of the groups I just middle or owning class people, middle-aged people, and English-speaking people. If you're a member of any of the groups I just listed, congratulations! You have an invisible privilege that you have been exercising over others your entire life. And not only do you have this privilege, you must check it and recognize that you are utilizing this invisible advantage over other people in your communities. For white people, you're exercising your privilege over people of color. For the able-bodied, you're doing so with those who are disabled. And for heterosexuals, I guess you are utilizing your privilege over the now, I don't know,
gays,
26
trans,
alphabet soup
non-binary,
heterosexuality.
lesbians.
For heterosexuals, I guess you are
Craziness,
utilizing
bro.
your privilege over the now, I don't know, 26-letter-long alphabet soup
Neopronouns.
that is every other sexuality that you can identify these days. And so on and so forth for all the other categories that Sharita Hill decided to list in this
Stupidity,
newsletter.
bro.
So not only does she define privilege, she gives you a list of categories of people who get to exercise that privilege. She then goes on to say it needs to be checked. And she also goes as far as to say that members of these privileged groups think that their achievements are earned when in reality they are wholly unearned. So yes, this newsletter went out to the entire staff of Johns Hopkins Medicine, and they all got to read about their inherent privilege and their unearned achievements. Imagine being somebody who's worked hard enough to have a position at Johns Hopkins Medicine and then receiving an email detailing your privilege and how your achievements are unearned. I think that would probably piss you off.
Yes,
and of course, this also got
rightfully
leaked
so.
on the internet and went crazy viral, which sparked even more backlash, and backlash that Johns Hopkins Medicine could not ignore. And rightfully so, because when we actually analyze this idea of privilege, we will find that it's ridiculous. Just because you are a member of one of the groups that is listed in this newsletter does not mean that you exercise a privilege over other people. In fact, there are many people that we would label as being members of the groups defined in this newsletter who don't have much privilege at all in life. There are plenty of white people who are disadvantaged. There are able-bodied people who are disadvantaged. There are English-speaking individuals who are disadvantaged. You can be a white male Christian who's born in a low-income area that's functioning at the same disadvantage of every single person of color who's living in the same place you are. But no, they'll argue that he's still a beneficiary of white male Christian privilege, whatever that means. And it's kind of hilarious that a newsletter like this is coming out in today's time because it feels like gaslighting. When I look around right now, the people who are truly benefiting living in the same place you are. But no, they'll argue that he's still a beneficiary of white male Christian privilege, whatever that means.
Garbage.
It's kind of hilarious that a newsletter like this is coming out in today's time because it feels like gaslighting. When I look around right now, the people who are truly benefiting from privilege are people of color, are women, are members of the LGBTQ plus community. We can all see it. We all know it's happening. So to get a letter that says it's not is just astounding. Ironically, the newsletter comes from a black woman who, while yes, is a doctor, has been given a made-up position. Yes, Chief Diversity Officer, I think, is a made-up position simply because she is black and female. And I think people are actually starting to catch on to this reality that this diversity, equity, and inclusion BS is in fact BS. because
Rubbish.
Hill Golden had to publish an apology and send that out to the faculty at Johns Hopkins Medicine. Here it is. It says, "Dear colleagues, yesterday I sent the January edition of a monthly Diversity Digest from the Johns Hopkins Medicine Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Health Equity. The newsletter included a definition of the word privilege, which upon reflection, and I'm sure she does not do much of that, I deeply regret. The intent of the newsletter is to
Amala,
inform and
she's
support
funny,
an
bro.
inclusive community at Hopkins. But the language of this definition clearly did not meet that goal. In fact, because it was overly simplistic and poorly worded, it had the opposite effect of being exclusionary and hurtful to members of our community. I retract and disavow the definition I shared, and I am sorry. I will work to ensure that future messages better reflect our organizational values. Sincerely, Hill Golden." Now, am I inclined to believe one single word of this apology? Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why, because I may sound a little harsh here. But in order for her to have the position of chief I shared, and I am sorry. I will work to ensure that future messages better reflect our organizational values. Sincerely, Hill Golden. Now, am I inclined to believe one single word of this apology? Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why, because I may sound a little harsh here. But in order for her to have the position of Chief Diversity Officer, she has to believe in that definition of privilege, of white privilege, of able-bodied privilege, of English-speaking privilege. Her position at Johns Hopkins